Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is June 10th, 2022. We have Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Ron Jacobs today. Where are you calling in from, Ron?
Burlington, Vermont.
How cool is that? I'm in Venice, California. First question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
The best thing for a human being, I would say, is a sense of self defined by their ability to be free.
Wow, that's that like sums up everything we're going to talk about.
All right.
Let's just end there. That's perfect. um, what's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Well, in today's world, I would say it's probably the internet. Before that, it was the written word, newspapers, stuff like that.
Did you grow up a reader because your parents told you to, as an example by them, or on your own?
A combination. My parents read to me, my mom or my dad, from the earliest I can remember, and so I just kind of developed a love of books, and then I just took off. I was one of those guys who all the librarians knew by first and last name by the time I was like 9 years old at the public library.
Yeah. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Oh, I would say s- so they can know more about themselves, but also probably equally to know more about the world and the people in the world that they live in.
Yeah. Is this need or want to collect information more innate or more invented?
Wow, that's a tough one. Um, I would guess it's more innate, even if
Yeah.
it's almost equal.
Yeah. And that's good. You get it. By saying, I guess, that's what I'm after. Some of these questions are stupid and they're neuroscientific or whatever, but it's your hunch or your guess is sort of more what I'm after. And, first thought, best thought, as Allen Ginsberg said. I think Allen Ginsberg stole that from James Joyce, in fact. But, anyways, the next question is, do thoughts create emotions?
Yes, I can say, and I think the opposite is true as well.
Yeah. Fill in the blank, Ron. I don't know what I think until I.
Well, I would say I don't know what I think about things that don't directly affect me until I read and or talk, etc., get information from a number of different sources about that. As for myself, it's what I experience.
Yeah. It's well done. Yeah, I got it from McLuhan. He says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it.
I think I would might be somewhere in between those two things or
Yeah,
something. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Can humans think without language?
I believe so. I think it's on a more direct level. I mean, I think of something like music. Music involves some kind of thinking process, but there's not, if you're just listening to music it's just you and the music. There's no mechanism in between, you know, like a word or something like that.
Yeah. Chomsky says that language is not just words. It's culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language breaks down, when language doesn't work?
I would think, well, I think on a societal level, what happens is society itself splinters. Um, as an individual, I think you tend to, or just stop trying to communicate. And maybe that's two parts of the same thing.
Yeah. But that almost like says you give up. Like if you're talking to someone at a grocery store about a political issue and it's evident language isn't working, what do? Stop?
Oh, probably revisit it later, probably try to find them some information to help express what I'm trying to express, them understand what I'm trying to express, and vice versa. I would
Yeah.
that's probably what more accurately happens. Yeah. Yeah.
Exchange. Yeah, that's funny because both of us being political activists, some strategies of mine in the past was like, how many inches of Xerox do you want me to give you? This was
Yeah.
pre-internet.
Right,
you know.
right, right, right.
Now it's like, how many links can I
Yeah.
give you? They're like, that's too many. Your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
Um, I think more thinking.
Wow, that's heavy. You know what
Yeah.
most people say? They go, "I think we're more feeling beings." That's what
Uh,
people literally say. "I think we're more
oh,
feeling."
yeah, that's great. Yeah. Uh-huh. They don't even get the contradiction there. Uh-huh.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
But my one friend says, "I feel we're more thinking beings." But it is amazing. Bridget Bardot says, "When I make love, I don't think." I'm like, "Good luck." How do you stop thinking ever?
Right.
It's like, how do you shut that off? Even the people, meditators, like, okay, now think about not thinking. How do you do that?
Right,
You
right.
know?
You would think about nothing, which is possible because nothing is something, but at the same
Right.
time, yeah, yeah.
Two questions from Alan Turing, 1950s. Is thinking a function of the soul?
Um, I think it can be, and I think it should be, but I don't think that it necessarily is.
Wow, that's heavy. The second Turing question is, can machines think?
Uh, I think machines can figure, but I don't think they can think.
Yeah. Do you more pursue meaning or more pursue happiness?
I pursue meaning more,
Yeah.
despite the fact that it always doesn't bring happiness.
Yeah. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we creating it?
That's kind of like a chicken and the egg kind of
Yeah.
question. Yeah. I would say consciousness has a certain thing, for the lack of a better word, exists, and I think what our mind does with it enhances that.
We enhance it. Yeah. It's a funny use of verbs because detect, create, enhance. That's good. It's a better verb, actually. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
I like to think speed of thought.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong answers to any of these
Yeah,
questions,
right,
but that
right, sure, yeah.
but that one you got right. Okay, now we finally get into the meat, like what we're after. Audre Lorde, the poet, says you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded, said, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
I don't know if there's a new tool. Um, I would think that I tend to agree more with Audre Lorde than, the second person, um, because I think the tools of the master are the master's tools, and he can manipulate them ultimately. But I think I don't know if there's a new tool. I don't know if there's a new tool, but maybe new uses for the existing tools. And I don't know exactly what that would mean specifically.
Yeah, George Lakoff said the Occupy movement could succeed if it used the existing tools and invented new tools. So I mean they did. They did the live broadcasting with their little cell phones
Yeah, and that stuff. Yeah, yeah.
and that stuff, and it was amazing. And I think it was a successful movement. I mean, it was inspiring. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Nothing.
Wow, what's the difference between worry and concern?
Um,
Is there a difference really?
um, I think, well, it's if there is, it's hard. It's difficult for me to explain. But I think worry connotes some kind of inability to do something about it, whereas concern suggests that there might be a way we can fix this or make it less of a concern at least.
Yeah. McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. So, by artist, I mean painters, activists, filmmakers, musicians, just general. They're the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so we can learn to cope with what we don't like about the inventions. So I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Maybe because we're not necessarily, I don't know if trained is the right word or if open is the right word, or maybe it's a combination of being trained to be open to those, because I think that's a flaw in, well, at least what we would call Western education is that's dismissed as not being real, essentially.
It's good. Brought up a lot of good topics there. Yeah, because we call it inner trainment.
Yeah, yeah.
Do artists have moral obligation?
I like to think they do, but I can't criticize one who doesn't. Like if I try to consider that, and I think of it in the same terms as like scientists. I think scientists have a moral obligation to humanity because otherwise, if you just go science for science sake, you can end up with something even worse than the hydrogen bomb.
Yeah, really well put. Are you more afraid of new ideas or old ideas?
I'm not really afraid of any ideas, I don't think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ron, can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
I would think well, my father was in the military, so we traveled a lot. And the first place I really remember living was in Fairbanks, Alaska. This was probably like 1957, 58. I was probably three. And, it was Fairbanks, Alaska at that time. And we had a massive snowfall. And down at the end of the block of apartments that we lived in on base, the plows would just push all of the snow to the end, and the fathers who lived in our little base on community, dug out dug out this hill and created like this ice castle inside and for us kids to play in. And I remember my sister falling down to the bottom and a couple of the bully boys who lived next door to us throwing snowballs at her, and me going to get my father to like rescue her. And that's probably about the first cognitive memory I can, and for the longest time I thought it was a dream, but my sister said, "Oh no, it really happened." So
Wow. And your sister's older or younger than you?
she's a year older than me. Yeah.
And do you think memory is more a curse or more a blessing?
I think it's a blessing. I wish humanity could remember more.
Yeah. Tell me within your immediate family and then outside your immediate family, Someone who had an impact on you, like a role model, just briefly, and what specifically was that impact?
Okay. My mom, I would say, inside the family, and that specific impact was to approach every day with a smile on your face, and she was a very glass half full kind of person, and I believe I learned that from her. Uh, Outside, um, it would when I was in high school, and we would have our I was raised Catholic, so we would have our the Catholic version of Sunday school, CCD they called it. And it would be once a month, and it was taught by a group of Jesuit seminarians. And there was this one seminarian there who taught me how to think about things very critically, including religion. And I that was his specific thing. He really taught me how to question everything.
It's
He's he
beautiful.
he never became a priest because he was questioning everything.
Wow. That is really good. I like that. So you answered the next question where you raised a particular religion. Did you ever check out?
Check out of the religion. Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
checked out when I was in high school. Yeah, yeah.
Do you pray?
I do. I pray to something greater than me. I kinda believe something greater than me. I don't know if it's real. It's just probably a comfort, if nothing else.
If God does exist, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
I hope you had fun.
Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I would say my answer would be the second. Evil uses people as a vehicle.
The follow-up is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? I'm going to set it up with a few modern thinkers' thoughts. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. It's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you, Ron, advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you address the Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I think it's true on one level, but I think it runs the risk of giving them I think if you ignore certain enemies, they will end up destroying you and whoever else they run into. I'm thinking specifically of like fascists or something like that.
Yeah. The MC5 said, it takes about 5 seconds to decide if you want to be the steamroller or the road.
Yeah, yeah, good. That's a great lyric. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I mean, how do you deal with an enemy? I mean, who would you consider an enemy now if you do, and how do you deal with them?
Um,
Or not you specifically. It's more like, how would you advise someone? Let's say a lot of people would say Putin's an enemy right now, or whoever, name, fill in the blank.
yeah, yeah.
How do you advise someone to deal with that?
I think of those 3 or 4 quotes you gave me, I think my approach is closest to John F. Kennedy's.
Forgive them, but don't forget their name.
Don't forget their name or what they do. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That isn't it amazing? Because were you born in 53?
55.
55, yeah.
Yeah.
I was born in 53, raised Catholic, and it's
Uh-huh.
amazing how that one. I have these other ones that I don't read. I love this one. Well, American Indians, indigenous say, your enemy is your best teacher. Now, I
That's
don't want
so
to
true.
say
Yeah, yeah,
I don't want to say best, but it is a
yeah.
teacher.
It's a
That's like,
Yeah. That's a thing Mao Zedong would say as well, that, know your enemy because that's who you learn about
yeah.
your mistakes. Yeah, yeah.
But Ram Dass says, I'm having a real hard time loving George Bush. So, it's cute and it feels good because, like, what is hating Trump or hating Putin going to do? And I said that to some activists right here in Venice recently, and we are all about love. And they go, no, I think you gotta hate him. And it was a woman, and she wasn't a hateful woman.
Sure.
She felt that the hate, you know, is a real thing for her or whatever. But it is an amazing thing because is hating more innate or more invented? Is it culturally learned to hate or is it innate in us?
I think it's part of the yin and the yang, so I think it's innate in us. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think our targets are culturally learned, obviously. I mean, why does everybody hate Russia so much? You know, I just don't get it. It's just like it's just another country that is screwed up like every other country. It's like, yeah.
It's like it reminds me of Dick Gregory. He says, why do we try to force democracy on other countries? It doesn't even work here.
Yeah, yeah. And he was right. Yeah,
James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
I think it helps us focus. I mean, that's what I mean, I think that's what it helps me does on a personal level, but I understand that. I'm always kind of like, why watch the Weather Channel when you can look outside and see what the weather is? So, but yeah, I think it helps us focus.
Yeah, focus is a good word. So Lewis Hines published photographs of child labor in newspapers. That's printed matter. Upton Sinclair wrote a book, The Jungle. It was the tipping point to change laws, meat packaging laws. I dropped this question quite a while ago, but I want to get your opinion because you've studied, political activism. We know that printed matter can be a tipping point to change a law. This question is specifically about changing a law. It's not that I'm for laws. I'm just saying about because we know that these are pretty solid examples. But can you name any music, theater, art, or film that it was actually the tipping point to change a law? Or just like, why is it that printed matter did that and these other ones don't really? I can give you some examples of what people have told me, but I'm just curious off top of your head if any come to mind.
I can't think, I start running through like films like The Grapes of Wrath, Salt of the Earth, some more modern ones out of the 60s and stuff like that. But I can't think of them actually changing the law. I mean, they were part of a zeitgeist and maybe moved it one way or the other. And the
Yeah,
same with music and stuff. But that is interesting why printed matter has that power.
it's amazing because Salt of the Earth has come up in the past. And, the one that Errol Morris's Thin Blue Line didn't change a law, it affected a court case. And I'm not in, Van Dyke Parks told me the International. It's a great song. I
Yeah,
mean, We Shall Overcome helped a lot of these songs helped. But one friend said Birth of a Nation changed immigrant laws, that it wasn't just about blacks, it was about,
right.
and so it is, it is amazing this thing. Maybe it's, well, I don't know. It's a funny thing. So what what first attracted you? You sort of touched on it with your Jesuit teacher teaching you critical thinking skills. But what first kicked you over, like again, this word tipping point, to say, I can be a writer, let's do that one, and I can be an activist? What are your two like tipping points?
Okay. I would say the writer one, um, when I really realized it was probably working on an underground newspaper when I was in high school and having people who didn't know me at all talk about how my writing was effective. And so was like, okay, that's a I want it to be effective. I like doing it. So I think that would be that. The activist thing, I don't know. I think the thing that really tipped me was 1968. I mean, I was young, but a lot of stuff happened personally and obviously in the world in 1968. When my father told me he was going to Vietnam in 68, I like I was like, okay, now I'm really against the war. I was kind of not sure, and then Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, the Democratic Convention, the stuff in France, that just totally turned me on to a whole reality that I had not paid attention to. But it also, the people looked like my friends' older brothers and sisters, so I knew it could happen, and I was like, I want to be part of that.
Amazing. And your dad was fine with you becoming an anti-war activist?
Not at
No.
all. We had we had many, 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 many. We had a long debate. It lasted years, but but it was mostly done with respect to each other, and I learned a lot about eh, listening to other people's views, and so did he. So
Yeah.
in the long run, it was a positive. But no, he wasn't happy with it at all. Yeah,
Yeah. And I would suggest people to consult your website where you have that. I think it's almost a 90-minute talk in a bookstore about 1968. That's really thorough, covering a lot.
yeah, the late part of the '60s there. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And, maybe, mine was the Berrigans, being
sure.
poets, Catholics, and anti war activists. There was a lot of that happening too to inspire us. But being a writer in an underground newspaper, that's fine. I actually did that too. But what were you reading that even made you say, I can write? Were there people you read growing up, poets or writers or newspaper article people who
Yeah,
in
I liked reading the sports columnists a lot because I was a sports fan when I was a kid, just like a lot of American boys. Baseball was my thing. Um, so, and I lived in the DC area at the time, so Tom Boswell was the guy, but I also was familiar with the guy who just died up there in New York, big Yankee fan. But anyhow, but the poets and stuff that I was reading were, I would say books like Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, Herman Hesse,
yeah.
um, um, then poets like I discovered Ginsberg and Ferlinghetti. I remember reading Ferlinghetti's "I Am Waiting," and that just kind of turned on a lot of light bulbs for me. Uh, and then from there, I just kind of delved into the existentialists and Ken Kesey, folks like that. Those are a lot of the people that got me thinking about writing it as a serious part of my life.
Now that it's years later, is there any of those that you return to and reread?
I reread all the beat poets. I reread Kesey. I like the book I like most of Kesey now. I like a lot of his interviews, but the one I go back to the most is Sometimes a Great Notion. Uh, and I would say with the existentialists and stuff, I go back and read Sartre's plays every once in a while. Um, can't remember who else I said. I every once in a while I like to go back and read Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test just because it's such a fun book,
It's
and
great.
it just talks of, even though he was as straight as an arrow, you know, it just he captures a certain zeitgeist from that time that and that was one of my places was that whole counterculture coming out of the San Francisco and so on. That was kind of like one of the things that I helped create my consciousness.
Yeah, same here. So sometimes a great notion. What's the moral or parable? Is there something he's trying to tell us in that?
It's I can it's you can go all over the place with it. My favorite answer to that question is in Kesey's book Garage Sale. He reprints an interview he had with Paul Krassner in The Realist, and I
Yeah,
think it came out like this. And he says it's actually about women's lib because Liv, I don't know if you remember the story, but Liv, who's Hank Stamper Jr.'s wife, and then his little brother comes back from the college to help the family fight the Union and so on. Um, they're both using her as a weapon between the two of them, and she just packs up and leaves. So, in a way, it's about
Wow,
the yeah, so it's about freedom, I guess, and I mean,
freedom.
I never liked the anti-union aspect of it, but that's part of the whole, I always looked at it more like, you know, it's just part of the whole American frontiers, you know, myth.
Right. Is the movie good for you? Is it the movie's fine or it's yeah.
I
Is
don't
is that Joanne Woodward you're talking about in the movie?
Yes, yeah,
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 that's
yeah,
what I thought.
yeah, yeah. No, the movies are good, it's well done. What I think what the reason I like the book so much is because Kesey, he waxes lyrical in that book, and have if I don't if you've ever been up to that part of Washington State, down there, um, up near the coast and everything, all those temperate rainforests, he he describes it. I mean, it's like you're walking in the forest when he's
Yeah.
describing those jaunts and stuff.
A screenwriting teacher told me a great film, again, or great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says great film or great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. When you're writing fiction, what role does intention play in your creative process?
I would say it's present, but it's not the primary. I try. I mean, I think most of my fiction has some kind of message to it, but I don't think it's the primary intent of me writing the fiction. I mostly like creating a good story, a good plot, and you know, some people like develop their characters and the plot comes around that. I kind of have a plot, and then the characters develop from that, and then it's kind of like a battle between the two of them of who takes front and center, and it's not resolved. I mean, that battle isn't resolved unless they all die, all the characters die in the end or something.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. When you're writing your fiction, how much are you thinking of your reader?
Well, not a whole lot because I don't have a very big audience for one thing, but the other part of it is I not a whole lot because I like to create a good story and I hope it finds its audience. You
Yeah.
know, with nonfiction, it's a different thing.
That's
You know.
exactly you have ESP. That was the follow-up question.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah.
When you're writing nonfiction, how much are you thinking of your reader?
Oh, I think of it a lot. Like when I'm writing for Counterpunch, which is who I write for mostly, um, I know who most of their I know the nature, the demographics more or less of their readership. And when I'm writing for other journals or other places, websites or whatever, I kind of understand who I'm writing for and I try to target for them. I assume different levels of comprehension, different politics, etc.
Amazing. What's the woman, Cindy? She was the anti-war activist during the Bush eras.
Cindy Sherman.
Cindy Sherman said, we're talking to the we're preaching to the choir, and there ain't even a choir," which was pretty heavy to think. Now, the readers of Counterpunch, I mean, how do you address that? And you want Counterpunch has a particular right. Yeah, how many years you been writing for Counterpunch? And then
Um, like 20.
20 years.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
how do you reach? I mean, you don't want to just preach to the choir, I
Right.
imagine.
No,
But
no, no.
how do you approach that whole thing? Like, oh, who's buying this or who's buying this? It's probably free online, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I
But for
think,
years you had to buy it, I imagine. It was a hard magazine for years.
yeah, yeah. And it was online, but then it was also, they had the hard magazine, and now they have a paywall for the exclusive stuff.
Oh,
Yeah,
paywall. There you go.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, I think one advantage of social media is that people can spread stuff that they read a lot further. So I think that's one way that websites like Counterpunch and other websites that whether they're on the left, the right, or somewhere else, that's how they reach out to new readers. And I
I
mean, I try to do that too. I try to post to different places. It's interesting that you said about the choir. I have a brother who retired Air Force. He's a politically, I'd say he's a libertarian. And one time he said to me, he goes, we were having a political conversation, and he was never a very political guy. He grew up during the age of Reagan, and money was his thing. But he said, you're just preaching to the choir. And I said, well, you read it, don't you? And he goes, good point. And he says, actually, quite a few of his friends read it, and they are not politically at all, but they read it because they like the writing, and it does help them think about their own positions or whatever. And I like to think it's modified their views a little bit. So
Yeah. And that's the thing. That's like Sidney Lumet, going back to that, can films change? He said, films can't do diddly. And he made politically,
oh
socially,
yeah, absolutely,
his whole career, Podbreaker, all these. And he says, but it ain't going to keep me from trying.
yeah,
You know?
yeah.
And, back to that, I forgot to interject. One was, my friend said, Ralph Nader's press conferences as performance art changed laws. So his press, that's a really good point. His press conferences saying seatbelts change laws.
That's very true. That's a good point.
Because his book is printed matter, but it was his press conference,
sure.
which was a live thing.
Yeah.
So let's get into politics a little. I mean, Ron, the bottom line is, I was doing events and political film series at the oldest political bookstore in America, Midnight Special, for years. And we'd have Jesse Jackson or, Christopher Hitchens or all these people speak. And then everybody would go, well, what can we do about it? And then they go, write your congressman. It's like,
right.
Yeah, right. Call and write.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the bottom line. What can we do about it? What can we do? Like just watching Cheney speak was really inspiring yesterday. And then they show that clip of Ivana Barr admitting on the big video projector screen in Congress. Is like, is this going to do anything?
I don't know. Because I think we're in a funny place right now in terms of that, because the way I kind of see it, like in terms of big movements, the last big movement that had any staying power, which had organizations behind it and stuff, which kind of excludes the Black Lives Matter stuff that happened in 2020, even though that was huge, was the movement against the second Iraq war, the 2003 war.
Yeah.
And basically what happened there was the leadership of one of the major organizations led them all into the Democratic Party with the whole Obama campaign. And that's kind of where we are now. I mean, and there's no real, and I think another aspect of it is, and this was the downside of, in my opinion, of like the anti-global capitalism movement of the late 90s and early 2000s before 9/11, and also Occupy, was the emphasis on being leaderless. Means that you get to a point, but and I'm not a big fan of the dominant male leader or the dominant female leader or anything, but there has to be an organization that has some kind of permanence in order for things to stay organized. Otherwise, there are eruptions of anger and thought, and they might move the spirit forward a little bit, like Occupy certainly did. It made it part of the common language again to talk about capitalism and so on, just like the Iraq war, and I made it common language. The word imperialism became part of the common language again, but it didn't, I don't think, when you think back to the movements of the 60s and the 70s, sure, they were long term, but they were effective in moving forward. And I think part of it was because they had strong leadership and strong organization. And I don't know if that works now. I mean, it's a different world for sure. So,
it's really an interesting point, because studying McLuhan as much as I did, Abby, as I do. Abby Hoffman said his biggest influence was McLuhan.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
said that, and it's like, whoa. And it was, doing some powerful leadership kind of things and waking up kids like us.
right, exactly.
And
Yeah,
and it was like fireside theater being the president or something,
yeah, yeah,
It was
yeah,
like, it can't happen. Or like, when I worked for Frank Zappa, and it was like, I hated when people wanted him to become president, but the idea of an articulate person talking politics coming, I mean, they got Reagan to be president. I always says, why don't we get Oprah to be president? Or, I mean, at
yeah.
least Angela Davis. I mean, I think Angela Davis,
She
I
would be
think
good. Yeah, yeah,
I think Angela Davis and AOC is the next ticket.
Yeah, that's good.
That's like, do it. But
yeah,
let's go back. It's funny because when you brought up that 2003, that Iraq war, wasn't that the biggest anti-war march ever in the history of the world?
yeah, yeah. I mean, they said. I mean, it even led the New York Times. They always like to, people like to quote it. The New York Times said, "Now it's a tripolar world." And they
Yeah,
said that the anti-war movement was a third thing. And then Bush and crew dismissed it as just another special interest group.
yeah.
So
And so, but again, you actually answered the question well. You're saying, what can we do about it? We need leaders. So uh, before I ask you about like somebody like Bernie, who's a leader in a way and it's articulate, who's your political hero of all time? Just of all time, who would you put on the top?
John Brown,
Wow, what did he do that impressed you so much?
he, some people say he was crazy, but he was such an anti-racist, anti-slavery person that he was willing to risk his life and to completely change the nature of the debate when he attacked the people who had it, the pro-slavery folks in, what was it, Osawatomie, when he attacked them in reaction to them coming in and destroying Lawrence, Kansas, which was built by, because Kansas was where they were going to have the next vote, pro-slavery, not slavery. So all the abolitionists were moving out from the East Coast so they could have more people, and then the um, the slavers were sending up roughnecks and cowboys and whatever to go populate, and they attacked Lawrence. And so, what do you call it? John Brown and his band went and, for the lack, I mean, to be truthful, slaughtered a half dozen human beings. And basically, what he did, and with Harper's Ferry, he created the situation where the reckoning had to come. And it was, as we know, it was an incredibly bloody reckoning. But sometimes I think he was not of this planet,
Yeah,
because he was so far ahead, and he was willing to risk everything for
yeah.
to change humanity.
Isn't that movie out over the last 3-4 years about John Brown? Wasn't there a movie about him?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah,
Anyways, that's like what you articulated there, Ron. Thank you so much, because I do find the way you talk is accessible to the common human being,
thanks.
rather
Yeah, yeah,
than talking highbrow intellectual political activism, which
yeah,
there's a good space for that. I mean, I listen to Pacifica all the time, so I get all that there, and the street talk too.
yeah,
I like both. But it seemed as though what you respected or got from John Brown was courage.
yeah. That's a good way of putting it. I think that's absolutely what it was. Yeah, yeah.
What does courage mean to you now?
To I guess to know when to stand up and risk everything for a particular belief, but also to know when you'd be better off if you took a different route to get to where you're needing to go. So my courage is more tinged with thought now, I guess, because I'm older. So
Yeah. Well, no,
yeah,
like 2003, I remember I'm not going to those anti-war marches. I'm too old to be hit by a rubber bullet. And it was like, that's wimpy. You shouldn't do that. And I says, I'm sorry. I don't feel like I want to be hit by a rubber bullet, you
My
know?
thing is I don't wanna go to jail no more. So, yeah, yeah.
Right.
I mean, I still go to the protest, but it's kinda like, you know how, like, in, like, heavy metal and punk shows, they got the mosh pit up front? I'm not in the mosh pit, you know? I'm in the back, you know, where I can find the door.
That's good. Because
Yeah.
to Matters March in Venice, and it's all young white yuppies, and the cops are stopping traffic on Lincoln Boulevard for us to march. And I goes, this is cool.
Yeah, this is a change. Yeah, 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 yeah.
But then you think, why would you ever want to do that? Some nut's going to drive his car into us. He can just barrel over the cop,
Yeah,
and he,
yeah,
you know.
yeah, yeah.
But it's also like, is the courage, like, just to think of those parents in Texas. The cop is standing there going, gee, what's taking us so long? Did you hear this? The
Yes,
cop
yeah,
actually said that, and the parents are going, give me your gun, I'll go in there.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And then the pepper spraying the parent, like, get away. It's like, oh my God. So, what's the difference between rights and responsibilities?
Between rights and responsibilities?
Yeah.
Um, um, rights are something that are granted to us by civil law or whatever, you know, the right to choose our well, we'll just, you know, think of the Bill of Rights, the right to choose your own religion, the right to speak freely, et cetera, et cetera. Responsibilities are the other side of what comes with rights. I mean, you know, to use a well-worn American trope, you don't have the right to yell fire in a crowded theater. You have the responsibility to know when it's appropriate to speak freely, and or if not, basically, you know, I'm not saying that, you know, and I know that it's not fair. I mean, I know some people with a lot of money or a lot of power can say whatever they want and they can get away with murder literally. And I know, but I'm in terms of speaking of the common folks, um, you don't you have the right to say whatever you want, but you also have a responsibility to the rest of your fellow humans, you know, to speak the truth, but not to necessarily inflame those who don't necessarily understand the truth. That's a tough question, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough question.
Yeah, it's like, are you familiar with the Yes Men and or any of the culture jammers? The Yes
No,
Men,
no.
you should check out the Yes Men.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
They're like modern day Abby Hoffman. They like go to WTO events and say, we're from Exxon, and they look like Exxon guys, and they say, we're gonna, and they're performance artists, and they're really good at it, and they get people to believe that they're political activists. And then it's like, well, so what? In the long run, I think it's great what they're doing, but it's almost like they're, how much is if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. So, I mean, it's back to that. I think I'll just jump to this question now. It's like, you create what you resist. Now, I'm not saying you, Ron. I'm just saying in general, there's this saying, you create what you resist. Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, said, you are what you hate. And James Joyce said, it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated in the religion in which you say you disbelieve. And Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, thank God I'm an atheist. So it's sort of like, it's sort of on the coattails of Alan Watts. If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. But, or it's sort of like choosing to have your sign at the protest say, stop war, or you're going to say nurture peace. Why would you put war in your poster if you don't want war? So I'm just curious on your idea, being a political activist, in this line, you create what you resist?
I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I can see. I mean, I kind of think of like, there's that story, the apocryphal story about Ken Kesey and the pranksters in '65 when they had the Vietnam Day Committee protests and they marched off Sproul Plaza and they marched down Telegraph and they were met by the Hells Angels right at the border of Berkeley and Oakland. And
Yeah.
Ken Kesey, like Jerry Rubin was like one of the main organizers then, and there was a couple women I can't remember their names, and they were actually, I think it might have been Judy Gumbo, but they were that she was later. They were involved. They were main organizers, and they had invited Kesey because they kind of had an idea that they needed to start well before Abbey and the Digger. Well, the Diggers were doing well before Abbey. Oh, we need to organize this community of freaks um, to make them political because they're basically dropping out of society, and they're the ones who are most affected by the draft, by the war, by all that kind of stuff, by the future. And so Ken Kesey and the Pranksters got up and they did a little song, some hillbilly song that he had written up. And then he said, what we all need to do is everybody needs to turn their back on the war. And basically said, by coming up here and shouting and having speeches, you're playing the same game as the people who make war are. And I always thought of that when I would be at protests and so on. And I got into the militants and everything, but I also thought, well, the only way that really works is if everybody turns their back on it. It can't just,
Everybody.
yeah, it can't just be 100 people. It can't be 100,000. It has to be everybody turning the back on the war. And I think that's, I think there's validity to that. You create what you resist. But I think at the same time, you have to acknowledge that that exists. And if you don't name it, I can go back to, if you don't name, quote unquote, the enemy, a lot of people aren't going to know who the enemy is. So
Yeah.
it's one of those weird things where you don't want it to be a binary opposition, but it is in certain points.
Really good points there, Ron. You're a good listener too. I appreciate it. My friend made a Vietnam documentary. It's really good. And he just sort of combined all. It's called Vietnam American Holocaust. He combined all the great Vietnam docs into 190-minute. Did a good edit job.
Yeah, I think
And
I've seen that. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, we're showing it at a art gallery in Venice, California. It's packed, 60 people, and there's like 10 gutter punks in the front row. And we're having the discussion at the end, and I goes, the only way we're going to end war is if no one buys anything and no one goes to work and collapse the economy. And the 10 gutter punks go, that's what we do. And I goes, no, you don't. You guys buy potato chips. You still buy stuff.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
you can't buy anything and you can't go to work. Like everybody would have to do it. And the economy would just collapse. And then we go, do we have to have a war economy? I mean, it's like that's what the whole Ukraine or a lot of the Ukraine thing is American war economy.
Yes. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like, and if you say that, you're like, you're for Russia
Oh, I
then.
hear it all the time. Yeah, I hear it all the time. Yeah, yeah,
You're not for the Ukrainians. Oh my God.
yeah, yeah.
The other one is that I'm really loving to hear your opinion is fog of war. I'll just lay it on the line because this is intense for me. It's a great film to see Errol Morris get the Oscar and get up there and supposedly bust McNamara. And in my opinion, all it did was humanize McNamara. Now, not that I shouldn't say all. He's a great
Yes. Yeah.
documentarian, and his motives and intentions, it's something I've rehearsed for years to talk to him about. We haven't gone one-on-one talking about it because he's already been told this a million times. But my wife's dad worked with the Black Panthers and Cesar Chavez, and he was a Freudian Marxist and a social worker and an activist. And he said, I said that to him about fog of war, and he says, humanizing anyone is good. So even if it's humanizing a war criminal, it's good to humanize people. So, but in the long run, it's like almost like giving them more power. You're legitimizing them, but you're like, if they would go, I apologize, I mean, basically McNamara said, hey, I won, so I write the history books. So any opinion on that humanizing a war criminal thing?
It's a challenge, like since my father was in the military, he was an officer, and part of his job when he was in Vietnam was to um, look at the pictures that the reconnaissance planes took and decide where to send the B-52s. So he analyzed that kind of stuff. And growing up in military bases, I had a lot of friends. That's what all their fathers were involved in this stuff. So it created a situation where, like, your father's human. Your father tries to be a decent human being in most cases. And my father tried to be a decent human being. I never doubted that he loved me, and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, when hearing him justify his job and stuff like that, you just kind of be like, what the heck, it's kind of, so I understand the idea of humanizing people. It's just like kind of like standing across from a cop during a riot or something like that and trying to talk to them, and they don't talk to you because they don't want to break down. They have to maintain this wall of blue or whatever. So I say more power to those who want to do that, but it truly depends on me, to me, on who the person is. Like, I don't think I could humanize McNamara. But speaking of him, one of his sons, or his son, just published a book talking about his father and stuff. I want to read it because it would be interesting. Yeah.
Totally. I read about that, and it's amazing. It's amazing how all these kids like our age bust their parents. Like the other great one is John Robbins of Baskin and Robbins.
Oh yeah,
He's
I read about that book. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
he turned down making a whole bunch of money because he says, dude, dairy clogs your arteries. Don't eat ice cream. And it's
yeah,
like,
yeah,
what?
yeah, 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 yeah.
What's the difference between rebellion and revolution?
That's a good question, and I think kind of what we've seen. Occupy was a rebellion. The Black Lives Matter thing in 2020 was a rebellion. I think the 60s is more complicated. I think it was a revolution in one way, in that it changed it was a cultural revolution. It completely changed the culture of the Western world, and in doing so, it also changed the culture around the world. It was not a political revolution, because basically, what we ended up with afterwards was one of the most reactionary governments the United States has ever seen. So, a revolution is something a rebellion is an expression of human anger and human desire for change. I think a revolution is take going beyond the rebellion and actually taking the reins and being willing to stop the people you just overthrew from coming back and taking power again. And as we all know, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, those two especially, and the Chinese Revolution, the those were all very violent. As they got rid of the ruling class. I mean, it wasn't pretty, but they made a decision that this is the only way we're going to be able to maintain our revolution. And then other stuff happened, but so I
Yeah,
think that's the biggest difference.
you articulated it well, Ron. I appreciate it. But I think the word revolution has it. It's re-evolving. So it's like rebellion is we know something's wrong. We're pissed about it. Revolution is we know something wrong. We're pissed about it. And here's a new plan. Here's the new plan, the new strategy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Also, on that, it makes me, what you just said about re-evolving, it makes you think of, like, one of Che's favorite famous quotes was like, "We're trying to create a new man, new human," and that's almost essential on the individual level if you want to move forward after such a revolution or whatever, that overturns the ruling class.
Trying to create a new human. That's great. Anger can be a productive emotion when fill in the blank.
When it's directed at systems instead of people. I th
Wow. Utah Phillips says anarchy is making rules for yourself, not others. Who's entitled to make the rules?
I would expand on Utah's thing, saying that you anarchy is being allowed or making rules for yourself and those you who choose to live with you and who you choose to live with.
Yeah,
So, yeah, because I mean, to me, that's the ideal community, but it's also the emphasis is on ideal because you really have to create a new human to live in an anarchist community because we all have baggage from wherever we were before. So,
that's
which
amazing. You know, one of your links is to, I think, AK Press or,
yeah, yeah,
yeah. And I think I've interviewed those people. And when I read that quote to him, he's an anarchy specialist. He goes, "That's not correct." You know,
yeah,
he just so that was good. You rephrased Utah, but it is just a jumping off point to discuss it. The question is, who's entitled to make the rules?
and yeah, that's whoever we give the power to, I guess. If you're going to keep it just on the planet, among humans, I guess it's only who we give the power to. And it's always dangerous to give the power to someone else without keeping some of it for yourself because people like power, you know.
Yeah. That's good. You really are a good listener because you listen to the cute quote I put it with and the question, like both, you know. Okay, here's Barnhill, socialist, John Basil Barnhill. Where the people fear the government, you have tyranny. Where the government fears the people, you have liberty. The 2005 film V for Vendetta paraphrase this quote. People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. How do you personally handle false fears? Like the war on poverty, the war on terrorism, or the best example is the war on drugs. This great government official in America says you can't have a war on drugs because drugs don't fight.
Right.
And you
Yeah.
and you can't say no to drugs because drugs don't talk. Unless they're really, but you know
Yeah.
what I mean by false fears, the war on fill in the blank. How do you personally handle these false fears?
On an individual level, I just kind of laugh. I just don't take it seriously because it's so absurd. Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, that's easy to say, but what do we do? I mean, they're massive because the war on homeless is huge.
Yeah.
And we
I
can,
mean, you do what you can. I mean, it's like I just retired from working in a public library, and you know, a lot of homeless folks, that's where they live during the day. And we're fortunately living in the community I live in. We are, people are pretty open minded and are totally, there's a lot of services for them and so on. But I hate the phrasing. I hate the use of the word war in that context. War on poverty, war on the homelessness, war on. Um, but I understand it in the context of our society, where war is such an omnipresent fact.
yeah, it's good. You gotta have a sense of humor. Does punishment work when a criminal gets caught, or whatever the word noun we use for criminals now, a lawbreaker, or whatever we want to call them? When a criminal gets caught, do they think, oh, I did something morally or socially wrong? Or do they say, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? So, in the long run, does punishment work?
I would say most of the time, no. I mean, even if people change their way, it's more likely because they found a new approach. It's not because they were punished.
Right.
approach to living their lives.
We got about 25 more minutes, man. I want to know what you most want to talk about because I can take this so many ways, but I love to get your thoughts on, you know, back to, well, let's try this one.
Sure.
What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Conviction. Because if you don't have conviction, you don't have anything to compromise.
Yeah. Is loyalty, oh, go ahead.
Compromise is useful in most instances, especially on an interpersonal level. But sometimes on a greater level, compromise is surrender, and so it's hard to know sometimes which is which. But
Yeah.
that's why it's important to have convictions.
Is loyalty based on reason?
Oh, I don't think so. Actually, when I think about it, I think it's more an emotional thing.
Yeah. Jean-Luc Godard told Michael Moore at Cannes Film Festival when his film Fahrenheit 9/11 came out, your film's going to help Bush get elected. Now, it didn't help Bush get elected per se, but it galvanized pro-Bushers. We've had a slew of political docs, some really good ones. I know we could talk about them until the cows come home. Berkeley in the 60s, a lot of Michael Moore's, there's tons of them. All the 60s great docs, Pennebaker. Do they more activate or more pacify?
Um, I, I think. Well, if you take a look at say Michael Moore and the 9/11 or Fahrenheit 9/11, I think at the moment Jean-Luc Godard probably had a good point. Um, I think at the same time it enraged a lot of people um, who were not pro-Bushes or anything. But I think like stuff. I if I look at say Berkeley in the '60s, I always consider Berkeley in the '60s as history, and so I think it's hard. It's hard for me to try to figure out what people say college students from today or high school students or people of that age or even younger who weren't even born then. It's hard for me to think of whether how that affects them, whether they just look at it as history or I wish I was there then, um, or maybe we could make something like this happen again. I think the last one is probably the least likely. But I'm reminded of Newsreel, and remember Newsreel? They they used to they were the well, it came out of like it was what who was it? Roz Payne, what's his name? Douglas, Robert Kramer, all those filmmakers, and they used to do those films about protests and so on. And then they would go out to all '60s coffee houses all around the country. I used to see them over at a GI coffee house when I lived in Frankfurt in high school, and those actually empowered the crowd and made us want to go and do stuff.
Yeah.
But it was a crowd of people for the most part who are already quote unquote in the movement.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much play they got outside of that until years later when they became historical documents. So
Yeah.
that's a tough question. I often think that, I had this friend who used to teach, he's retired now up at Evergreen State College, and he was a big fan of Cuban film. And he would always talk about film because he used film in his classes. He taught a lot of stuff about third world revolutions and the Chicano movement and so on because he was a Chicano guy. And he said that that debate would always come up. Do films create or reflect? And he said you can't really tell because it all depends on the person who's seeing them. So I know that's not a good answer, but I think it's a fair one, I guess.
No, it's totally fair. It's most people don't know. McLuhan wrote 22 books in 40 years. Mid-career, he updated the medium is the message to, or the medium is the massage to the user is the content.
Wow, I never knew that. I never read that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's like I saw Michael Moore, or I saw these great filmmakers. Uh, they all did. All the old guys hated Michael Moore. It's like, dude, he raised the bar on your genre.
Yeah.
You don't have to like his film, but at least he got hardcore documentaries into popcorn theaters, much like the really godmother of it was Harlan County.
Yeah.
That was like, get a film into the in hearts and minds. These films got into, what was your Chicano friend's name at Evergreen?
Larry Mosqueda. I think he was originally, I think, from Colorado.
Yeah. Well, this is now to fake news. So if you looked up fake news years ago in Wikipedia, it didn't say disinformation. It said satire news.
Uh-huh.
And here's another one. Eric McLuhan said this. The word fact and the word fake both are rooted etymologically in the
From the
Latin
same.
word
Oh, huh.
to make.
Interesting.
So,
Interesting.
so what
Wow.
did we grow up on, Ron? That was the week that was. We
Right.
grew
Yeah.
up,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
grew up on Mad Magazine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now did see in my opinion, and then what we swoop into is Saturday Night Live mocking the news for 30 years. And I mean Gary Krasner was a king of it with
Yeah.
Paul
Yeah. Yeah.
Paul
Yeah.
Schrader, the guy, the Spinal Tap bass player, he's done it for many years too. But what the same question, does Colbert and all these guys, do they more activate or more pacify? Does all the comedians doing that, go ha 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 ha, like a lot of kids get their news from Colbert,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
is that more activating or more pacifying? I mean, I agree with you saying, does it create or reflect? That's good. But I mean, just your hunch, or for you alone, does it activate you or pacify you? Like you go, ah, ha, ha, I can laugh at that.
I think it activates.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I have a daughter who that's mostly she watches Colbert. Her and her boyfriend. She watches. And she's in her 20s. She watches Colbert a lot, and she tells his type of activism is like the 60 Minutes. It's not going real deep or anything, but it does uncover issues, and he has his perspective is at the very least disrespectful to the powers that be,
Yeah.
uh, and that helps her come up with stuff and makes her get riled up about the things that she gets riled up about. So.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. It gives me hope.
Yeah, me too.
Is perception reality?
Uh, huh. For most people, I believe it is. Yeah.
There's a great film I highly recommend you see. It's called Problema. It's from 2010. It's 95 minutes, and it's all these modern thinkers tackling about 20 political questions. And I'm going to just ask you a couple questions from their list. What's today's most important unreported story?
Um, I would say that capitalism is collapsing.
It's good. What if it collapses, what should we replace it with?
Ideally, it should be replaced with some kind of what do they call it? Libertarian communism, anarcho-socialism kind of thing. Nobody at the top, but just a lot, like a federation kind of situation, but communist in the way things are distributed.
Does that exist anywhere as a good example in the world now?
No, I think the only place it might, and I don't think it's even, I think that would be the in Rojava, but I don't think it really exists there either because those folks now are tied in with the U.S. and Israel. Um,
Yeah.
so I think, but the Bookchin idea is kind of what I'm thinking is close to, and Murray Bookchin is kind of close to the what did he call it, municipal libertarianism, and I would just emphasize more the sharing communist, small c communist side than the libertarian side. But
How you
obviously,
spell
no Bookchin,
Murray's
B
name
O
again?
Bookchin.
Yeah, that's good. Municipal, what's the second word?
Libertarianism.
Libertarianism, yeah. Though I always hear libertarians are pot smoking Republicans.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, most of the ones I know are. Yeah, most of the ones I know are. Yeah, yeah.
How do we stop our governments from going to war?
That's I don't have I that's a question I don't have the answer to. It's been one I've been searching for my whole life, I guess. My whole cognizant life.
It's great. If the journey is more important than the destination, why do we have to name a destination?
Um, I don't really feel like you have to.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not. I like the journey. I don't really want to get anywhere.
You're hitting them out of the ballpark, dude. That's called psychogeography. That's like, the guys who changed the world in France in the 20s, they just sat there at the coffee houses and
And just,
they you just walk around aimlessly. You don't have to have a destination.
yeah.
Um, Ron, tell me one major element that's changed since you first started being an activist and a writer, and one major element that stayed the same.
In the world.
Nope, for you personally.
Oh,
Like one element of your creativeness being a activist and a writer, what
I would
stayed the
say the
same?
okay, yeah. I would say the thing that's changed is that my understanding of the world has expanded exponentially, and my ability to incorporate opinions, well, to analyze opinions that before I would have just ignored, but analyze them through my prism has increased a lot, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and one thing that's what was the other part of it to have
Stayed
stayed
the
the
same.
same? Um, my positivity.
Yeah. Did you get that positivity more from the way your parents raised you or on your own?
I think more from the way my parents raised me. Yeah.
Yeah. Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Um, I guess it would be considered a weakness by a lot of people. Not really being accepting of pretty much anybody, uh, which I believe has given me strength to be more patient and listen better.
Yeah, it's really good. We in McLuhan world we call that suspended judgment.
Yeah.
He says it's called this great line he said is understanding is not having a point of view. You could say, I love Facebook or I hate Facebook. Well, when you're in your lonely teenage room, do that. But when you're with one or more people, if you try to suss out how Facebook has changed the world, then we're going to figure out how it shaped our behavior. And maybe cope with what we don't like about it, you
Right.
know.
Yep. Yep.
American Indians, indigenous cultures, Eastern cultures respect their elders. Can you explain Western culture's disdain for old age?
Um, I think it's a fear. A fear of death. I think even though our culture in some ways worships death, what who is that guy? One of the Frankfurt School guys, maybe Fromm, Eric Fromm, the Thanatos syndrome and stuff, and the Arrow syndrome. I think our culture worships death. I mean, but I think we're afraid of it at the same time. And I think that's why we are afraid of old age, and we don't like old age at all.
Wow, I dropped that question for so many years now, and I just yanked it out, and it's amazing what you said. Can you forget to die?
I suppose you can. I mean, I try to think, you know, mo if it came suddenly, I guess, or if you were at peace with where you were at as you moved on, you know? I mean, I know very few people. I mean, I've known quite a few people have died, but, most of them have fought it till the bitter end, even if like, my father fought it till the bitter end, and then when finally he said, "Okay, I'm good," he passed away in 24 hours, but it took him
Wow.
he was sick for quite a so it's interesting, so that's a good question. That's a
Yeah,
an interesting way to phrase it. I really like that.
yeah. No, people can't get it. That it's rooted. I've got all the roots of where it came from, but they go, "What do you mean? Can you forget to die?" You know, and
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
well, it's just a question. I'm not saying, but that's amazing. This Eric Fromm, the Eric Fromm actually, how do you say, worship death?
He called it the Thanatos syndrome, because Thanatos is what the Greek word for death, I think, and, I don't know if he said worship death, but I wanna say that that's what he said, yeah. It's been a while since I read his stuff.
I'm going to look into that. That's very interesting. On what occasion do you lie?
Okay, um I've in my life, I've lied to authority figures to keep my ass out of trouble, and I've lied to my children when they were young to spare them certain information that would,
Yeah,
that would have been a challenge for them to digest without me being afraid it would screw them up forever kind of thing,
yeah.
you know?
If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Probably, not to sound corny or something, but I'd be like, you know, "Keep on trucking, dude. You're going in the right direction," you know?
That's beautiful. Keep on. How do you find peace of mind?
Uh, by Well, the best way for me to do it is by just, like, kind of sitting in a quiet place, whether it's outside, inside, with no distractions, but I grew up in a family of 12 with 12 children, and so
Wow.
and I was the oldest, so I really and we never had enough rooms for everybody because they didn't build those kind of houses except for the rich people back in those days, and where we were living on military quarters, I learned really young to be alone in a crowd and just be able to focus my thoughts inside. I mean, I can remember my dad saying, "Hey, where are you?" You know, and because I was there, but I wasn't there. I was daydreaming or whatever you want to call it. You know,
But not to get too personal, your mom gave birth to 12 children?
12 single births. Yeah, yeah,
Amazing.
yeah.
Wow. Which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
I'm not real big, but I always find myself when I'm at a house that where it's coming under, I always turn it around, so I must have an opinion on that.
Why over?
I don't know. I have no idea, you know, I mean, I see this debate and I mean, like, why is this a thing? But it is a thing, so, you know, there must be
It's
something
funny.
going on. Yeah,
The patent is over 100 years old, and it has it going over.
okay, that's
But
interesting.
95% of people say over, but the people who say under insist, "Oh, no, it's under's way that's the way."
Well,
They
it's
just
funny. Yeah, I was just down at one of my brother's houses, and he had it under. So when I was sitting in the bathroom, I turned around and he came out and said, "Which one of you kids?" Because he has a few kids, you know. And he says, "Which one of you turned it over?" And they're like, "We wouldn't do that. We know better." You know. I said, "It was me. It was me." So it's kind of funny. Yeah. But he was
busted by the
he's
older.
hardcore. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
hardcore.
If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
um, Stumbling on something like that. You know, I would have to have stumble in the title somewhere. That's
I
about the
like
best I
that.
could do. Yeah.
It's one of my favorite words because Buster Keaton turned the stumble into a dance.
That's yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
that's
could
good.
see that. Yeah.
So, they wanna scent the glue in the binding of your autobiography. What smell?
With smell?
Yeah,
Um, I'd be good with, I don't know, maybe lemon balm. Yeah.
nice. If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed, and what would it be made of?
I'd want it to be made out of paper mache so it could melt in the first rain.
And where would you want it
Uh,
displayed?
I don't know, maybe Berkeley,
Berkeley,
yeah.
nice.
People's Park, you know?
Oh, People's Park,
People's
beautiful.
Park, yeah.
Ron, tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Lots of money. Well, maybe that's not good, that's probably evil. Um,
No, that's that
yeah.
actually the answer I get the most is money, fame, and heroin.
Never wanted the heroin.
Yeah,
Fame I know is a bad is not a good thing for a person,
yeah.
so yeah, yeah.
But in general, you did answer it because most people would say money is a good thing, but you being an independent thinker, you're like, "Wait a
Yeah,
minute."
maybe that's not yeah, yeah, yeah.
That is not. If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
I'd probably, like, tread vomit harder or something, I don't know, you know?
That's
I mean,
good.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Tread vomit harder. I've
yeah.
never had that answer. That's good. We're almost done here. I really appreciate your time. These are 5 quick Alan Watts questions just off the top of your head in a few words. Who started it all?
God.
Are we going to make it?
Yes,
Where do we put it?
back in the ground.
Who's cleaning it up?
Our grandchildren.
Is it serious?
Eh, more or less, yeah.
I like that.
Not
That's
too
a
serious, you know? Yeah,
that's
yeah,
a yeah, not too that
yeah,
like Frank Zappa says, "I'm very serious about being not
yeah, yeah,
serious."
yeah.
Um, couple more. What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
Um, a move towards taking more and I can only say this about the United States because I haven't been out of the country in a while. A move among a lot of the young to take more personal responsibility for the world they live in.
Yeah, it's good. Thornton Wilder in 1928 said, "Art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time." You've laid your cards on the table for over 90 minutes. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this, but what's it really all about for you?
Um, it's mostly about not hurting the people I care about,
Yeah,
not hurting the planet, and I guess that's pretty much it. But
that's
mostly,
right.
yeah,
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, my friend says, be, don't, you know.
yeah,
You think people are basically born with that? Where that's innate in people, wouldn't you say?
born
Or
with
is
what?
be not hurting?
Yeah, yeah. I think humans are essentially empathetic,
Yeah.
and I think that they are also competitive, and I think capitalism encourages the latter over the former.
Yeah.
And since the world is the economy is around the world now, it just intensifies it.
Yeah. Well, I won't ask you the ultimate political activist question again. What can we do about
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
It's like
I'll give you the same answer. Keep on trucking.
I love that. Keep on trucking. Last question, and I hope this never ends. Ron, it's really been a delight. What gives you the most optimism?
I think this has been my answer ever since I had children, but young people,
Yeah.
you know, they just their presence, and probably the younger, the more optimism because they're the least jaded, So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I get that answer almost 90%.
I believe it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. They asked I got the question because it was the question they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. They said, "What gives you the most optimism?" And he said, "Other people."
That's good. Yeah, yeah, that works.
Yeah, and it's like he spent his life cutting down and making fun of people, but at the same time, it is an important thing. It's sure been fun, Ron. I really appreciate this. Thank you so much. I'm going to hit the end button, but I hope our conversation never ends.
I hear you. Sounds good.
Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.